With every passing year, I seem to be developing more and more appreciation for E3. It's far from perfect and in fact riddled with flaws and inconsistencies, but for 3 days in June, all eyes turned to a collection of presentations that try quite hard to get the viewing audience excited for a video game or two. Developers and publishers try so hard that they in fact veer spectacularly into the realms of the surreal, where you get to bear witness to some of the genuinely insane strategies deployed in an attempt to grab your attention. I'm already watching this crap, and a well-made trailer is all you really need. What else do you feel that you need to add to this? There's a danger that year-on-year E3 showcases tend to merge together, and it becomes quite hard to pick out the memorable moments, so maybe going to the extreme end of the spectrum will do some good for a game's publicity. But don't get too crazy though, because it tends to get uncontrollable. Or maybe do, because crazy turns heads and provides me with shit to talk about in a video. One of the worst things you can do when it comes to advertising and generating publicity for a game is to do something boring. So thinking outside the box and giving people bizarre presentations to talk about is not such a bad idea. Does it often veer away from what is expected as normal human behavior? Hell yeah, but the average audience at E3 is very used to this now. They're gonna have to do something actually criminal this year to up the ante. My money's on EA, since they've got the history. It might sound strange given the climate we find ourselves in these days, where every year Nintendo pre-record their Direct to keep things snappy and condensed to a 40-minute presentation, but Nintendo used to physically turn up at E3, with human people trying to convince audiences that what they were selling was worth their time and money and attention. The problem is that a lot of Nintendo's recent inventions have relied heavily on groundbreaking technology that presses against the frontiers of innovation, and also doesn't work very well from time to time. Honestly, I was excited for The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword at the point where Shigeru Miyamoto proudly took to the E3 stage in 2010 with his Wiimote and nunchuck and convinced me that this game wasn't as polished as Nintendo would have liked it to be. I wish this was a one-off occurrence. It wasn't. Way back in 2008, Nintendo were convinced that they could do justice to one of their upcoming Wii games by showcasing it live in front of an audience of many people. Technical difficulties may have been the cannonball that sunk Skyward Sword ship, but 2 years prior, it was something a little more in-house that set Wii Music down a path of mediocrity and disappointing review scores. In general, this was a rough year for Nintendo with some obnoxious hosts, not Reggie, and many demonstrations of what these new Wii games can do. It makes a lot of sense to have a live performance of Wii Music, but I'm not sure this is a game designed with that in mind. Either you concentrate really hard on playing all the notes, at which point it'll look like the people on stage aren't having a lot of fun, or you can dance around on stage, at which point, oh no. It hurts. It actually hurts a lot to listen to and to look at. I have a lot of unironic love for Wii Music, but you see it showcased like this, and there are so few positives you can glean from it. Other than maybe the guy they got to play the drums, he seems pretty happy to be there, and the internet is more than happy to accommodate him. But overall, it makes for some tough viewing. Imagine if Nintendo announced Labo and then spent 40 minutes clumsily folding cardboard in front of millions. It's not that far off, really. I think the whole live performance thing is a dangerous game to be playing, because it's the kind of thing that requires a lot of rehearsals to ensure that not a lot goes wrong, but at the same time you can tell when a game demo is heavily manufactured and scripted and rehearsed, so you kind of want something more organic, like controlling a game with your body. Who the fuck thought that was a good idea? Ah, the Xbox Kinect. I sometimes forget what an absolute piece of shit you were. Intriguing technology for sure, but definitely a concept that needed more R&D and for a space to open up in the market for something like this. If you're not the kind of person who sees new technology and is immediately smitten with it, you might struggle to see the purpose of a camera that tracks your movements and lets you kind of play video games. Who was the Kinect marketed for? Individuals who are concerned about getting enough exercise who can only be satiated by playing some terrible fitness game? Maybe it's kids. Oh, it's goddamn kids, isn't it? Was this a reaction to the Nintendo Wii being this wonderful family console? I don't know, but enough people at Microsoft thought this was a good angle to approach from, and so we've got all of these absolutely terrible presentations of various Kinect games, hosted by whatever awful child actors were kicking around in the office at the time. Honestly, the adults aren't much better and should arguably be more aware of what is needed here. But I watched for showcases for KONAMI'S and whatever the hell this game was, and I feel an overwhelming urge to die.
Turn around and play that.
It's watching presentations like these that make you pine for the simpler things in life, like a trailer, and a game being able to stand up on its own, not whatever the holy hell this is.
Oh no, Captain Hook! Whoa.
Maybe I'm being a bit harsh because these kids seem to be having fun, or at least a manufactured facsimile of fun, but you need to be aware that this went on for a few consecutive years in the late 2000s. Every year you'd build anticipation for E3 only to remember that, shit, Microsoft are probably going to talk about the fucking Kinect again, aren't they? You know, it was a great idea with fucking appalling execution. A kind of 4 out of 10 come back next time. No, wait, hang on. Please don't do that. We're free now. Please just leave it. My mind's made up. I've decided that I was a little harsh on Wii Music and miscellaneous Kinect games because despite their many shortcomings and their tone-deaf approach to live performances, at least Nintendo and Microsoft were trying to convince the general public to buy some video games. That's kind of what E3 is for, really, so on a technical level, these presentations are doing what is necessary. Ubisoft, on the other hand, have taken a lot of pride in exploring every possible option available to them that may somehow make a game look appealing. I've shown their Fever Dream Just Dance show number twice in between these entries, and I wish I was living in a world where that was as weird as things get with Ubisoft. I mean, it probably is when referring to game-specific presentations, but then there was that time when Ubisoft played a random round of laser tag in front of many people. At its best and weirdest, E3 is capable of producing moments that make you think, am I the only one watching this? Ubisoft in the past have tried to create memes and have had live showcases that have gone wrong or felt incredibly forced. But in 2010 they surpassed all of this by just randomly playing a game of laser tag in the middle of a conference. I mean, if you were given the time slot, isn't that what you would do? Okay, so technically this was for a reason. Ubisoft were making a version of laser tag that they felt could be marketed to the same kind of audience that likes their video games, and it's clearly not the kind of thing where you can just drop a trailer for it and move on. But there comes a point when watching a fairly standard Ubisoft conference with small nuggets of innovation and interesting announcements sprinkled here and there, that things spiral out of control very quickly. You got poor Joel McHale here talking about the rise of creativity in the gaming industry, and he's ironically interrupted by a bunch of models pretending to play a game of laser tag in the audience and on the stage. And I think Joel's bemusement is scripted, but it's about the only part of the showcase that makes a lick of sense. Not to mention the larger issue at play here with trying to sell overpriced laser tag called Battle Tag to an audience that usually plays games in relatively confined spaces. No, I completely understand why Ubisoft felt the need to wreck the momentum and flow of their own conference to fuck around with their own audience and host for 6 minutes. We're making memes over here. Come back later. There's a real ebb and flow to how each of the big three developers perform at E3 each year, and it has an influence on the wider world. So say Nintendo do badly and Microsoft do really well, that will affect the gaming climate in some way, and also other things like share prices and that kind of crap. But every dog has its day, and some days are better than others. If you can, I'd like you to cast your minds back to the 2015 edition of E3, which has to be one of the most one-sided victories in favour of Sony. Microsoft had little to show for itself, and Nintendo were busy ruining their own franchises despite the awesome intro with the puppets, and that left a giant hole for Sony to occupy with just the craziest shit. I remember there were rumblings before E3 even started that Sony had The Last Guardian ready to go, and amazingly they did. But they also had the Final Fantasy VII Remake and Shenmue 3 stored away for good measure. I make a pilgrimage to GT Live's reaction video roughly 5 times a year. It fills me with too much joy.
Dude, this is a crazy conference.
And I'm mentioning this now because such a ridiculous high came 9 years after an incredible low. Sony hadn't quite tapped into that beautiful reservoir of game reveals in 2006, and were instead doing what they could in order to get the PS3 off to the best possible start. At least, I think that's what they were trying to do. Honestly, there's some good ideas in here, and some of the games they showed off were kinda cool, but this whole conference lacked two critical things: energy and self-awareness. A lot of this conference is boring and filled with statistics and vague platitudes about how Sony are putting innovation first or whatever. And when you're showing off your new console, that is one of the worst approaches you can take. It kinda feels like no one gives a shit, which is surprising for a brand new console. However, the moments where the presentation picks up have a different problem, which is beautiful, pure, untainted ignorance. Kaz Hirai, mustering the enthusiasm to squeeze out a Ridge Racer, lives long in the memory.
Ridge Racer!
As does the giant enemy crab showing up in a game that was mentioned as having strong ties to real-life historical events. Oh yeah, I remember when the giant crabs took over Japan. It's fucking everywhere in their textbooks. And then there's the big bombshell at the end of the PS3 being roughly as expensive as buying an Xbox 360 and a Wii. And you've got the perfect storm. Took Sony a while to recover, but they got there in the end. If you're not inspired by Ridge Racer, you're just not trying hard enough. When you're sitting down to write a video about E3 moments that went above and beyond what is expected to deliver something stupid and potentially wonderful, you find yourself sitting through hours upon hours of presentations in the hope of finding something insane. It's not so bad though, since it's a good dose of nostalgia, and it's interesting seeing how the presentations have evolved over the years. Honestly, not many of these showcases are legitimately difficult to sit through. There's always one though. Konami have been moving to the beat of their own drum for a couple of years now, and so it's become both easier to understand their actions by account of some level of insanity, and harder to predict what they're gonna do next. The warning signs have been there for 8 years, because in 2010, Konami landed in Los Angeles and promptly stole the show with one of the most baffling and awkward conferences in the history of E3. You look at Sony in 2006, and they didn't really know what they were doing, but Konami just 4 years later managed to produce something that I am still trying to process.
You just continue to press the same button like X, 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 and Y, 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 and X, X, and Y, Y, Y again, you'll be sucked. Right?
Is that where this is going? It's like some kind of weird variety hour where Konami picked up the strangest collection of hosts they could find to promote their games in as abstract a way as possible, and just throw in random segments with wrestlers and anime girls and this weird music number at the end, and this guy, and this guy.
That's you, buddy. It's not just dancing. This is dance masters.
You're right.
There's about an hour and a half of footage out there, and every time I watch it, I find new things to be amazed by. It's like taking a microscope to a clump of dirt and being able to find 50 billion different components in there. You just keep finding stuff you hadn't noticed before. Most of the time, I have no idea what game they're talking about at any one point, which is really what separates Konami's efforts from everything else. The promo overshadowed each game by a huge amount. That's probably a sign that you're doing it wrong. This is RabbidLuigi, and you can attribute a lot of the English on display in Konami's conference to Konami's reluctance to hire a translator to help out with the language barrier. When you look at the conference from that point of view, it becomes ever so slightly more tragic, because you got all these Japanese developers and hosts trying really hard to explain a game and also, play with the crowd, entertain them, in a language they don't know very well, and that takes a lot of work. I'm not so sure about the guys who know English though. I think they might just be fucking crazy. Have you got an idea that you'd like me to turn to a countdown? Let me know in a comment down below, and make sure you check out my Twitter, where I'll be turning the best submissions into a poll where you can then decide the best topic. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.